the action that is taking place in the east of the country. I mean, Boris Johnson himself has already expressed concern for the Donbas region. I mean, is there now an inevitability to the Russians taking territory in that part of the country?
I don't think there's an inevitability at all. I mean, I think the last time that I had the privilege of speaking for the government in the morning was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were reflecting then on how imminent the demise of Mariupol may be, and yet those fighters that are in Mariupol defending it so heroically are still going 3 weeks later, and they are soaking up a huge amount of Russian combat power as that defense continues. So I think that what we will see in the Donbas is a very different type of conflict to the one that we saw around Kyiv. I think we'll see a conflict between two forces that are much more evenly balanced, where the Ukrainians have the advantage of defensive positions that have been dug in and prepared over the last 8 years. And that's going to make it an extraordinarily difficult nut for the Russians to crack. And I think that with all of the support that the Ukrainians are getting from around the world, there's every chance that the Ukrainians can see them off.
We know that the Ukrainians certainly have been fighting and fighting hard. Your boss, Ben Wallace, was briefing MPs yesterday. Viewers can see it on the screen. Perhaps as many as 15,000 Russian personnel have been killed, perhaps as many as 30 of the battalion tactical groups.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Those are the numbers that the Ukrainians report, and that's vast. That is nearly 3 times as many dead as Russia suffered in the first Chechen war. And I mean, that is, nobody should rejoice in that. That's 15,000 Russian families who haven't got their son or husband or brother coming home. But people in Russia should be clear that that is because the Russian plan has been defined by incredible hubris, massive political interference in military plan making. And we're seeing exactly the same now, where there is pressure from Moscow to deliver a victory by the 9th of May so that Putin can have a nice parade through Red Square. Even though that makes no military sense. The weather in the Donbas over the last week or so has been absolutely awful. And so driving the Russian army to launch an offensive now, simply so Putin can have a nice day in the sun on May the 9th, is just going to cost Russia thousands more lives. Now, if you're on the side of the Ukrainians and you want the Ukrainians to succeed in defending their territory, that Russian hubris is a massive advantage for Ukraine. But if I was a Russian family, I'd be deeply concerned that those in the Kremlin were not acting in my interests.
Indeed. On that point then, Minister, what more can you tell us about the additional assistance that we're providing? A lot of kind of speculation, perhaps informed speculation in the papers about Stormer vehicles being sent, perhaps as providing some form of radar as well. What more can you tell us on that?
Well, that's exactly right. And, you know, the Secretary of State has been very, very clear that Russia only has itself to blame, because every time we have gone up a gear in terms of what we are providing, it is a direct consequence of the way that Russia has conducted its operations in Ukraine. Now, Stormer is an air defense facility that is mounted on an armored vehicle. We think that that's necessary in order to give greater protection to Ukrainian ground forces and the civilian populations in some cities. We have been scouring the earth for 152 millimeter artillery ammunition, which is the artillery ammunition that the Ukrainians would need for their existing guns. But we've also now been working with allies around the world to provide them with 155 millimeter, which is the NATO standard caliber. And that means that hundreds of thousands more artillery rounds are now flowing in from the United States, particularly to Ukraine. There are countries in Eastern Europe that are giving up sophisticated air defense systems, hundreds of tanks. I mean, this is an amazing effort, and the UK has been to the fore in corralling it.
The response, though, from the Russians, in particular, the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, warning that this could be us on the precipice of World War III, already suggesting that Russia is not fighting Ukraine, it's fighting NATO. I mean, obviously, that clearly removes, you know, the Ukrainians' agency in all of this. But I wonder what you make of the brinksmanship in terms of the rhetoric about potentially, you know, a third global conflict.
Well, look, I mean, there's a couple of points of distinction. Firstly, the donor community is not NATO. NATO has been involved in reinforcing its eastern flank. So a lot of the deployments of our troops, ships and aircraft to Eastern Europe are very much under the NATO flag. But the donor effort is something that is being brought together by countries that are from, yes, many of them are from NATO, but others are from beyond, the Australians, the Kiwis, the Canadians. The Canadians are in NATO. And so, that is, it's not NATO that is doing the military aid. But Sergei Lavrov might also reflect that the reason that there is a war in Ukraine right now is because Russia rolled over the borders of a sovereign country and started to invade their territory. NATO is not an expansionist offensive alliance. NATO is a defensive alliance. And all of this noise from Moscow about somehow their attack on Ukraine being a response to NATO aggression is just utter nonsense.
Minister, I wonder if we can move away from your brief now to perhaps the kind of the biggest individual issue facing politics and indeed the public domestically, the cost of living. We understand that there is to be a cost of living cabinet today. The Prime Minister very keen to get as many ideas as possible, for as little money as possible, given what we've been spending over the past few years. What is the hope from this meeting this morning?
Well, look, I mean, the reason that the meeting is happening and the reason that so many meetings on the cost of living happen in government every single day is because the moment that you go out and knock on doors in your constituency, what you find is that that is the thing that hardworking families across the United Kingdom are most concerned about. The cost of living is getting to such a point now where even people on good wages are struggling to make ends meet, and they are looking to the government to help them with solutions. Now, what they will decide in Cabinet this morning is for them, and it's certainly not for me to try and trail, but already for this year alone, the government's put £22 billion of targeted funding in to support those who are struggling most with the cost of living. And the fact that Cabinet is meeting today to discuss it more shows you just how seriously this is taken by the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and the rest of their colleagues in Cabinet.
But isn't the simple truth, though? I mean, I've read the article. The Sun was briefed on the cabinet meeting taking place this morning, and one of the biggest announcements, well, one of the biggest policies that was flagged up in the article was removing tariffs on rice. Now, I understand that will help, but we're talking pennies and not pounds. I mean, isn't the simple truth that there's not an awful lot that the government can do without spending money?
Well, I mean, look, there's no doubt about it that these interventions are expensive. £22 billion of government intervention to assist with families with their cost of living is already huge. There'll be other levers that government can pull, and no one of them will be a golden bullet. But cumulatively, if you can provide people with lots of small savings across their cost of living, then cumulatively that does start to make a difference. So I wouldn't sniff at the removal of a tariff on a particular food type, because if that sits alongside a reduction in fuel duty at the pumps, which has happened, if that sits alongside a rising of the personal allowance, an increase in the national living wage, cumulatively you can start to see, and assisting people with their energy bills, cumulatively you can start to see how that starts to ease the pressure on the families who are struggling the most.
Minister, I promise you I am not being sniffy about cheaper rice. You have no idea how much curry I eat. I do, however, want us to conclude on on a couple of related topics around freedom of speech. Angela Rayner, of course, you will by now have seen that the article, such as it was, in the Mail on Sunday. I have to admit, I feel slightly uncomfortable this morning. Yesterday, clearly, we were talking with your colleague Chris Philp, the article itself, misogynistic, sexist and all the rest of it. And then we hear that the Speaker of the House of Commons has summoned the Mail on Sunday's editor for a meeting, presumably to chastise him. Does that sit easily with you? The Speaker of the House of Commons summoning a journalist to explain their actions?
Well, look, Lindsay is fiercely independent, and rightly so. He is the Speaker of the House of Commons, and he must do what he thinks is in Parliament's interest. I would just reflect that, I don't think that the Speaker is trying to limit freedom of speech. In fact, my understanding, although I wasn't in the chamber yesterday to hear him say it firsthand, my understanding is that he made the point of saying that he wants to protect freedom of speech, and that the role of the press lobby in Parliament is hugely important. But there are female colleagues in the House of Commons, on all sides of the House, who have to put up with a level of sexism, misogyny every day that frankly is unfair. It is a disadvantage to them that I don't have to face as a male member of parliament or a male minister. And I just can't believe that in 2022, we're in a place where the story that was written on Sunday was written. I can't believe that one of my colleagues...
The story was written because your colleagues briefed...
I think it's despicable. Oh, look, I just find it outrageous that colleague who sits within a party that has delivered 2 female prime ministers, that has 2 women in the great offices of state, that is surrounded by amazingly capable female MPs on the Conservative benches as well as over on the Labour benches too. I just don't know what parliament that they think they sit in. I find the whole thing ridiculous, offensive. I'm sorry for Angela. And if the Speaker is going to put a shot across the bows about the way that women in Parliament are being reported, that's a good thing. I have no doubt that he is protecting freedom of speech and he won't want to see that infringed. But I do think that Westminster has just got itself into a mess and it looks awful.
Yeah. To continue with the freedom of speech theme, what are your thoughts about the taking private of social media platform Twitter by Elon Musk? I mean, the bill's certainly up there and the board obviously still has to agree. But do you have any concerns about the richest man in the world owning perhaps one of the most significant social media platforms?
Well, the government doesn't have a view. The government will let this go through as a transaction. But there is... I think Elon Musk has made some good noises about being a protector of freedom of speech. I think I've also heard him say some stuff about ending the anonymity of the trolls on Twitter. And those of us who use Twitter as part of our jobs will know that Twitter can be an absolute sewer sometimes because people do have anonymity and that makes them very brave when they have anonymity. If Twitter is going to be cleaned up as a platform, be somewhere where freedom of speech is championed, but that anonymous abuse becomes more difficult, then that's a good thing. But that's my view. The government's view is that this is a takeover bid on which we have no view at the moment.
James Heappey, great to have you on the programme as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you.